Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the Russians continue to meddle in the natural gas and pipeline industry. We'll get to that, but first it's time for our, guess what we're going to do? It's time for our regular bridge and road update. What's going on with construction and some other aspects of transportation. We'll get to all of that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
I know what you're thinking. You can't travel about a mile and not see folks out there waving you in this direction or that direction as the road and bridge repairs in the state continue at, I think, a record pace. But the guy to help us out here is sitting across from me, Bob Latham. He's the Executive Vice President with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. He's our go-to guy on all things transportation. Am I right about that? A record amount of construction, road, bridge. You can't go anywhere, right? And you guys are out with the flags, and guys and gals, men and women, I should say.
Terry, we've been here, over the years and talked about it, and starting back in 2013 when we passed our massive transportation funding package, we're seeing the results. It takes a while sometimes to plan these projects out. So I'm going to talk about a couple of major projects right now. The Central Susquehanna Valley Expressway up in the Selinsgrove area, and that's going to be moving along here rapidly. We just took bids on about a $200 million upgrade of Interstate 83 from Harrisburg down into York. So we're starting to see some of the fruits of that investment from Act 89, as we call it. One thing with the Pennsylvania Turnpike and that intersection between I-95 north of Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania Turnpike will finally open here in the fall. And that was something that's been 20 years in the making, and it all came about as a result of Act 89. Of course, we're fixing our bridges. We're no longer number one in bad bridges in the country. So
that's a good thing.
We're working that down. So we're getting a lot of stuff done, but it is the season, so that's when we have to do the work.
I'm on the Pennsylvania Turnpike a lot, and this going to 3 lanes is wonderful. Now, when you get up into some of those Appalachian mountain areas, you got to look and say, how are they going to get a 3rd lane up through there? But now, the funding for that, as you point out, took place a few years ago. How is the funding for it? Has that been consistent?
It has been. There's been a couple of things that have been disruptive, I will say, when you look at both the Turnpike and PennDOT. Of course, when the bill passed, the transportation bill passed, the legislature siphoned some of that off to the general fund, if you will, and in order to fund the state police. That was capped a couple of years ago and is slowly being reduced. So that's a positive thing. It's not disrupting funding for the state police at all, because that's being augmented by the general fund, but it's freeing up more money for PennDOT projects. Now on the Turnpike, a lot of their toll money as a result of that is going through PennDOT into the general fund for public transit. That program comes to an end in 2022, but there's a lawsuit that could disrupt that even further.
But let me get this straight. The point is, you're not arguing that there shouldn't be funding for the state police.
No, of course not.
I want to make sure that our viewers get that. You're arguing that they should fund it out of the regular General Assembly approved funding, not by taking money out that was approved for what? Approved for road and bridge construction.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, a legislative budget and finance study showed that there's appropriate levels about $500 million, and we're at about 270 now. So the legislature is slowly ratcheting that back. We'd like to see it faster, but at least that program is in place to get it back more in line with that 500 number, and that's a lot of money. You think about $275 million per year over a period of time. That could be a lot of repairs that could be done.
Lot of money.
Because we've got a lot of work to do still.
So how long is this massive bridge and road repair, I'll call it construction, scheduled to go on?
Well, ad infinitum. We're, like I said many times when we're here, our state is old, cold, and we're wet, so our roads wear out. This past winter, which wasn't a particularly bad winter, but because it was mild, it was a freeze-thaw, we've seen a lot of havoc wreaked on particularly our interstates.
Oh, yeah.
Travel continues, truck travel. We're the Keystone State. People come through the state.
You can't go anywhere and not see trucks.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, the ports on the East Coast, the goods come through Pennsylvania.
Yep. All right, we're going to run to a break. I want to talk about automated speed enforcement, a bill in the legislature. It also has its controversies, as you know. You've covered this for a while. We'll get to that following these words. Good.
Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Bob Latham joins me. We're talking about road and bridge repairs and construction of all sorts. But first, or secondly, I should say, let's go to automated speed enforcement. There's a bill. First of all, what's automated speed enforcement?
Well, you talked about road and bridge construction, so we're talking about slowing motorists down through highway construction zones so workers can return home safely when they go to work in the morning. We have a big problem, unfortunately, with people speeding through highway work zones. They're dangerous. There are lane shifts. And as a result of that, there are accidents. One of the things that we've seen in our neighboring state, Maryland, is where they've introduced a system where your speed is checked by a camera, and if you're speeding 11 miles an hour over the speed limit, you get a ticket.
Wow.
There are lots of announcements. There is signage. There's a website where all these are in place. There's plenty of warning for motorists, and there's no excuse for traveling more than 11 miles an hour over the speed limit through a highway work zone. There's absolutely no excuse. And so what this does is it tickets people, and it's shown to be very effective. That's what the bill would do. It would enable that.
What's going on with it?
Well,
in the legislature.
What's going on with it is you saw a lot of publicity about reducing the size of the legislature and anti-bullying and some other bills that were caught up in last-minute politics. Unfortunately, so was this one. Yeah. And we're extremely disappointed because all the stakeholders were in agreement. There was a compromise bill that was ready to be passed by the House, and it didn't go because of this.
That sounds familiar, by the way, on a number of other pieces.
There's a number of other pieces. This one isn't getting much publicity, but this is the one that actually could save lives. And the thing that we're really disturbed about is the fact that we needed it to pass in June so the Turnpike Commission and PennDOT could go through the procurement process in order to get these systems ready to go for the next construction season, and that's very much in jeopardy. So this needs to go right away at the beginning of the year, no excuses.
All right, talking about the Turnpike, a group of independent truckers have filed a lawsuit. They're seeking an injunction on having to do with tolls. What's that all about, and why should our viewers? Why is that important to?
Well, it goes back. It goes back to 2007 and another bill that authorized taking a good portion of the Turnpike's toll revenues and using that as a funding mechanism for public transit. Back to the highway bill or the transportation bill of 2013, that set a deadline for that program of 2023. And as you saw, and as your viewers saw, the Turnpike announced earlier this week that they would again raise tolls by 6%. So the tolls are pretty high on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They keep going up and up and up.
Repeat that for the folks who are going to use the Turnpike. The fees go up?
The fees go up, the tolls will go up at the beginning of 2019, another 6%. They've gone up 6% a year because what the Turnpike is doing is they're selling bonds based on that toll revenue, using that bond financing to to provide money for public transit. That system has to be replaced. That's a ticking time bomb for the general fund that needs to be dealt with. And what has happened is there is a group of independent truckers who have filed a constitutional challenge against that toll and bond scheme, saying that it is illegal beyond the Constitution. If they are successful, then this program will end right now, not 2019. So it's something that we all have to keep an eye on.
All right.
And let me just make one other point. The Turnpike mentions, they are still putting about $500 million into their capital program, which means upgrading the Turnpike itself. Yeah. But that article also pointed out that they provided $6 billion, that's billion with a B, over the last 10 years, to other transportation systems. Those systems need to be funded, but this idea of the toll thing has got to be replaced.
Is this another case where you get a piece of legislation and it says, we're going to do A and B and C with it, this is where the money will go, and it ends up D, F, and G? I mean, get moved around.
I mean, everybody knew we were going to use this some of this toll bond money to pay for public transit. It was really about the only way they could come up with a way to do it in the short term. But now this is coming to an end, and we're going to have to find a way to replace it.
All right, in about a minute or so, let's look ahead. I want to have you back in August to review, but let's look ahead over the next couple of months. What's going on?
Well, let's look ahead. First of all, at the national level, we're, of course, kind of disappointed in what's happening there. The president came out at the beginning of the year and said we're going to do an infrastructure package, came out with kind of I think a weak effort on that, so that was shoved aside. We're now seeing the Republican leaders in Congress supporting a repeal of transportation funding in California for purely political reasons. So we're not really happy with what we're seeing in Washington. On the future front, as we become more fuel efficient with cars, we're going to have to find a new way to fund highways. The gas tax is something that's going to have to be replaced. Delaware is looking at another option now, a mileage-based fee. I think the technology is going to be there that we can kind of slowly slide from a consumption tax to a mileage-based fee. That's not a couple months in the future. That might be a couple years, but it's something that we're looking at. It needs to be talked about.
I'm going to get the last word.
Sure.
Two things. Number one, it's about safety for folks on the roads, and number two, it's about having a modern infrastructure, and it's all about the economy. Would you agree with that?
I think
jobs.
Those are three very good points.
I mean,
all of the investment in infrastructure was really aimed at making it safer for us to get around and move goods and services as well as people.
All right. You may not believe this, but the Russians continue to meddle in the natural gas and pipeline industry. We have an expert that's going to come on and help us understand all of that.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
And I know you might not believe this, but the Russians continue to meddle in the natural gas and pipeline industry. To be honest with you, I understood clearly they meddled in our election in 2016 and in some previous elections, not just here but around the world as well. But meddling in our natural gas and pipeline industry. Joining me to explain all of that is Kevin Sunday. He's a director of government affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber. I mean, do you think a lot of people are surprised at this? I mean, that we got down to the business of the economy?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Well, 10 years ago, Russia was the biggest natural gas producer in the world. And then hydraulic fracturing, Marcellus Shale takes off in Pennsylvania, United States. That's not good for Russia, not particularly when we start to export our natural gas to Eastern Europe or countries where Russia would like to sell their gas. So what does Russia do? Well, they start to do some hacking of grid systems. They've done that in Germany. They start to fund environmental groups in Europe to oppose these pipelines all of a sudden. And Hillary Clinton talked about this in her speeches after leaving the Obama administration. The President Obama had an intelligence report that outlined the Russian playbook. One of it was to set up these environmental groups and fund opposition to the projects. The other one is to do a lot of the online trolling that we talked about with the election.
Yeah.
Anytime there was a debate on energy policy or climate change, you'd see the Russian trolls kind of jump in and stir up dissent. And we're starting to see some echoes of that here.
In our state.
In our state. There was, you remember a couple years ago, there was a big debate about the pipeline project out in the Dakotas. Russia Today is like the state-armed propaganda TV station for Russia.
Right.
They highlighted a lot of that activity. As the focus on pipeline development came to Pennsylvania, they would constantly highlight stories and put out bad and negative information about infrastructure projects in the state. So the playbook's there. It's the topic of congressional investigations. Two committees have, at the federal level, have asked the IRS to look into our environmental groups in the United States getting funded by Russia. Of course, some of those groups are saying, no, absolutely not.
But you have, let me stop you here for a minute. You've provided me with a list of the organizations and people who it's been documented, right?
Absolutely. So this is not one side of the political spectrum.
That's what I mean. You've got folks from the Obama administration. You've got, go ahead. I'm going to let you provide the answer.
The former head of NATO and the premier of one of the European countries, Rasmussen, he's come out and said Russia's meddling in our energy system. Hillary Clinton said so. President Obama's director of national intelligence, again, the congressional committees. It's come out time and again that they clearly do not want to see America succeed when it comes to energy independence. And we think that
doesn't seem to be working, however, does it?
Well, you are seeing. You've seen in your poll lately, the support for natural gas in Pennsylvania has dropped, and I think that this has something to do with it.
I get your point.
There's been a lot of social media discord about energy, and again, it's not slowing down the development, it's not slowing down the investment, but people are a little askance at this.
So what gets done about it? I mean, it seems like there's some options. One, from your point of view, I'm the neutral here. One is you can make sure the public is informed about this. Number two, is there anything, it doesn't seem, we always look to Harrisburg, to the Pennsylvania legislature and the governor, anything? Go ahead.
Well, I would say three things. One is, physical security at our critical infrastructure is important. So there's a bill came out of the Senate that increases penalties against trespassing and intent to vandalize. Now, it's a little bit different than the cyber conversation, but you need to harden your physical assets if you want to have energy independence. The second thing is cybersecurity. The online social discord is one thing, but when we're talking about hacking and every part of our energy system, there's repeated attempts every day. We know the Public Utility Commission has had exercises to make sure cybersecurity there. That's a focus of Chairman Gladys Brown. And then the third thing is we got to really be careful on an individual level when we see something online. Where's this coming from?
Did you all call the President of the United States, who's meeting with Vladimir Putin, and say, "Can you please stop the meddling"?
We have not had that direct line of communication.
Wouldn't be a bad idea, would it?
No.
All right, we got a couple of other subjects we're going to take up after the break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back. I'm chatting with Kevin Sunday from the PA Chamber. We just went through this Russian meddling. I'm still a little perplexed by it. Maybe not perplexed, but astonished that it's still going on and that something needs to happen there. I mean, we can have a legitimate, I think you would agree, we can have a legitimate debate over the environmental issues. Would you agree? Let's have the debate.
Let's have a debate.
But let's not do what? Let's not have a foreign government meddle into the internal affairs of whether we're talking about politics or the economy. Would you agree with that?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We need all the energy resources we have. We need to have an honest and fact-based debate, but we don't need another power trying to tell us which way to go.
Yep. All right, before I let you go, I want to, the budget was done. It was a fairly modest budget in the sense, the state budget I'm talking about. From the business, no state income or sales tax hikes. The governor, obviously in a re-election year, didn't even propose them. Talking about Governor Wolf, didn't even talk about them, and he did in previous budgets. So from the business point of view, what was in the budget that was helpful, and what are you going to look ahead for?
Sure. A couple things were helpful. First being, of course, no tax hikes. The other thing we saw, an expansion in the educational improvement tax credit. That's an important tool for a lot of businesses. You have to
explain that.
Sure. So what businesses are able to do is offset some of their tax liability by supporting education and nonprofits in their community, and that helps everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's the business is saying, here's on a cost-benefit basis what we see works in our communities. We're good partners for the folks in our neighborhoods that are doing good things. We want to support them, and in exchange, the state government has said, on a somewhat limited basis, if you do that, some of your tax liability is offset.
Yeah.
We have a pretty strong economy now. We still lag the national average on unemployment, but because of federal tax reform, we see that as one of really the big drivers for why the budget was relatively painless this year. Revenues came in above estimate, and for the first time in, I think, 10 years, we put money into a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
The thing we have to be aware of is, so everything is going great, economy is firing on all cylinders, unemployment's going down, and we basically almost just met expenses. So what do we do if you have a downturn in the next couple months? At the same time, when entitlement spending, corrections, pensions keep going up, the combined salary and benefits for the average state worker is now for the first time above six figures. So what do we do moving forward? From our perspective, next year, that looks to maybe think about something like a rewrite of our tax structure at the state level. We saw the success of what happened in D.C. We think we can have a similar outcome in Pennsylvania where we really pave the way for growth in a way that benefits everybody.
But overall, when you take a look at the general health of the economy in the state, you're exactly right. I mean, it does lag. Our unemployment is not 3.8% as it is nationally, and we still have, but it does look like it's turning the corner, or it has turned the corner, I should say, in almost all segments of the economy. Not every segment, but is that your general? So you're optimistic then, more optimistic than pessimistic about the next couple of years in the economy.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of innovations in the robotic space. Pennsylvania is becoming a hub for tech, for life sciences. Agriculture, unfortunately, struggling. There's been the discussions about the dairy crisis.
The dairy crisis. And trade. Trade has to be some concern.
If we get trade wrong, and the U.S. Chamber just had a release about this, if we pull out of NAFTA and tear up our free trade agreements, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million jobs lost in Pennsylvania. It would be catastrophic if we get trade wrong.
And there are a lot of unfair trade deals, and how we negotiate them with the folks in NATO, and you can go to Europe in the European partnership. I mean, that we have. But overall, I think you're right. The economy does seem better, and more people are working. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. You're always welcome. Keep us updated on what's going on in the business community.
We'll do that. Thanks, Terry.
All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.